So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to do a plain garter stitch, which I feel is, as a beginner, it's the easiest way than to completely start off with your knit and purl. Just to get familiar with your tension as you go. And it allows you to practice on holding your knitting needles and getting a feel of your yarn and get a feel of how to maneuver the yarn with your stitches so that it's not too tight or too loose. So when you're a new knitter, it's gonna happen. You're gonna have your stitches a little tighter than normal because you're trying to get comfortable with holding your knitting needles, not wanting the stitch to fall off. Like you're thinking, I don't want the stitch to fall off of the knitting needle. So when you're holding everything, it's a little bit tenser than once you're relaxed and you get a feel of how you're comfortable with the knitting process. So what you do is you go ahead and put your, now cotton, it's pretty much stays together, the fibers in your loop, and that's what you want, because when it starts splitting, you have to basically fudge it, and as a new knitter, you may end up getting more stitches than you anticipated. So what you do is comfortably put your knitting needle in like that, and then what you will do, we're doing the English way for knitting. Put it over there, and then as you can tell, so we want to make sure the knitting needle goes past that yarn to make your loop. So basically, effectively, it's like you're making a knot, but it's a stitch while you're knitting. Okay, so I just like to tighten this a little bit because it gets a little loose the first stitch. Make sure you don't grab your strand. I've done that plenty of times because you get so excited to start your project, and then it's like, oh, I grabbed the tail part and not the ball, not the yarn that's attached to the ball of yarn. So then what you want to do is slightly, but not tug tight, and then wrap it around the knitting needle. Make sure this is up while this stays in the center. As you can see, it's in the center. And then kind of just wrap it so that it comes out nicely. So you just kind of put that, make kind of like crisscross. Okay, kind of slightly tug, but not tight. And you'll be able to get a feel of that later. It'll just come naturally. Don't worry if it doesn't right at the moment. And then turn it around. Okay, my hand's kind of in the way. Turn it around so it's in between. And then go here. What you do is put your knitting needle, okay, the first one, you put your knitting needle in like this. It's kind of crisscross. And then what you do is wrap the yarn around. So basically, when you wrap your yarn around your knitting needle, you're effectively doing this. Visualize a knot being made. Visualize a knot being made. Okay, so say, just comfortably see how a knot's made. Okay, comfortably, if that visualization can help. So instead, visualize that this is your fingers making a knot. So effectively, it's a knot. So what you do is you go around the knitting needle And see how it just rests on that stitch? Okay, so now you're gonna pull, and it's this one the knitting needle goes through. So it's resting on that stitch. So it's coming through, and then you just help it off. Like for example, if I was knitting with my hand or creating my knit stitch, what I'm doing is just grabbing it and pulling it through the loop. Just pulling it through the loop. Pulling it through the loop. My knitting needle is just helping me pull that stitch. So what it is my knitting needle is just helping me see. The knitting needle is just kind of helping me pull the loop through, pull this string through the loop. And then it makes that like that. Yeah. Okay. All right. So crisscross through the loop, around, and this yarn, it's nicely between the two. And then when you, this is the little trickier part, is trying so that your stitches don't fall off. So all I did was made sure my knitting needle is over this strand. So keep that strand down. You might want to kind of hold it a little. And then all you're doing is, yeah. And then you go through, around, and effectively you have a split. So basically where it's split, you make sure the knitting needle goes right, camera, yeah, you make sure your knitting needle goes right through this loop. And then you go like that. Yep. In, around, and it splits the circle up. And then you go like that. Kind of splits it in half when you're doing it. Like that. There you go. Up, around, splits it in half. You're going through that loop right there, around, me close this cam for a sec. Let me bring this down even further for a sec. Okay. So then, crisscross, crisscross. Okay. Slightly pull around. As you can see, it's sitting in the center, and we're going to put the knitting needle through that one. Just kind of through this way. There we go. Just keep going. Because even though it may not look like it, it may look like I'm just kind of knitting, right? I mean, I am, but I mean as in the functionality of getting the tension precisely right. I am still maneuvering it even as I lift off. That's why, like, I don't pull it tight, 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 but secure it in a way. All right. So now, and with cotton, it tends to be a little heavier and a little thicker yarn. So for a beginner knitter also too, it's not uncommon to have it a little tighter than normal. Just because it's not lightweight like a Red Heart worsted, I don't know, 3 or 4 yarn, however it is. The acrylic portion to the fibers on the acrylic is lighter. Cotton has a little more, because the way it's twisted feels like it's a little bit heavier. So your tension might be a little looser in lighter weight yarn, and then in heavier weight, slightly heavier weight worsted yarn, it may be a little tighter. All right, so just kind of like that. Around in the center, you'll see, and you see that little hole. So you want this knitting needle to go over that piece of yarn, and you just do this. Okay. Slightly around in the center. Pull it through. Yep. All right, around the knitting needle. It's in the center. You see your loop, so your knitting needle is going to go through right there. And it's all about the consistency on how to space it out too, how much to pull that loop to get it back into form so that's not so loose. And that's where tightening it out with the tail a little bit helps you out. So you have your stitch right through the loop. You have your space. Now you're going to just put in the center of your loop your actual, and then you're going to make sure your knitting needle goes through that loop right there, and then just let it go through. And then if that's too loose, so you want to freely use your tail to give it that little nudge to get your tension just a little better. Through. There's your opening. Around. It's centered. This yarn stays more to this knitting needle. put it through. So you see it's actually through the actual loop, not behind this, not behind. So you're actually through, slip it off. There you go. Yep. Okay. Through, around, inside that circle, through, just a tiny little tug. See this, and it's already shaping its form. There we go.